3 months after Dr. Amanda Brooks died to save the universe, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of Earth's newest space station. Through the wide windows, he could see ships from dozens of different species arriving at what had become known as Freedom Station. The Zephyrian Empire was gone, not destroyed by war, but transformed by the simple gift of individual choice. Across 17 galaxies, former collective drones were learning how to think for themselves. Some were struggling with the change, while others embraced their new freedom with joy. Jake watched a Zetherian transport ship dock at the station. These ships no longer looked like dark, menacing warships. The crews had modified them, painting them in bright colors and adding personal decorations. Each ship was now unique, reflecting the individual personalities of its crew. "Captain Morrison?" a voice said behind him. Jake turned to see Thax-9, the former Zetherian overseer, but Thax-9 looked completely different now. He had removed most of his biomechanical implants and regrown parts of his original organic body. His eyes, which had once been cold and empty, now showed emotion and curiosity. "Hello, Thax-9," Jake said. "How are you adapting?" Thax-9 smiled, an expression that would have been impossible when he was part of the collective. "It is difficult, but wonderful. Every day I think thoughts that are mine alone. Sometimes I disagree with myself, which is very strange, but also exciting." Jake nodded. Many former Zetherians were having similar experiences. After thousands of years of shared consciousness, learning to be individuals was both frightening and liberating. "I wanted to thank you," Thax-9 continued. "Dr. Brooks gave us something we didn't even know we had lost. She gave us back our souls." Through the station's communication system, Jake could hear the constant chatter of different species talking to each other. Former Zetherian worlds were reaching out to species they had once conquered, asking for forgiveness and help. Many of the liberated species were responding with kindness, sharing their knowledge of how to live as free individuals. Danny Walsh approached them, now wearing the uniform of Freedom Station's navigation department. "Captain, we're getting reports from the Outer Rim. Another group of former collective species has declared independence from their old empire." The effect of Dr. Brooks' sacrifice had spread far beyond the Zetherian network. Other collective civilizations throughout the galaxy had heard about what happened and were beginning to question their own group mind systems. Species that had lived as hive minds for millions of years were experiencing individual thoughts for the first time. "Any problems?" Jake asked. Danny shook his head. "Most are handling the transition well. They're setting up councils where individuals can make decisions together without losing their personal thoughts." Kate Rogers joined them at the observation window. She now commanded the defense forces for Freedom Station, though there was little need for defense anymore. Most conflicts in the galaxy had ended when species learned to value individual choice over conquest. "The Altarian delegation has arrived," Kate reported. "They want to learn about human democratic systems." Jake smiled. The Altarians had been one of the first species conquered by the Zetherians 3,000 years ago. Now they were free again, and they were eager to learn from humanity about how to organize a society of individuals. Paul Stevens walked up to the group, carrying a small device that looked similar to Dr. Brooks' consciousness amplifier. "I've finished the new communication array," he announced. "It can translate individual thoughts and emotions between different species without forcing them into a group mind." This was one of the most important developments since the liberation. Species that had never been able to communicate properly were now learning to understand each other as individuals rather than as collective entities. "Dr. Brooks would be proud," Jake said quietly. They all stood in silence for a moment, remembering the scientist who had sacrificed her life to give the galaxy the gift of freedom. Her name was now known throughout 17 galaxies as the human who ended the age of collective oppression, A new ship approached the station, unlike anything Jake had ever seen. It was clearly of Zephyrian origin, but it had been completely rebuilt. Instead of the dark, threatening appearance of the old Empire ships, this vessel was covered in windows and gardens. It looked more like a floating city than a warship. "That's the new Zarian," Thax-9 explained, seeing Jake's curiosity. "My people have rebuilt it as a place where former collective beings can learn to live as individuals. We have schools, art, studios, places where people can explore their personal creativity." Jake was amazed. "You built schools?" Thax-9 nodded enthusiastically. "Education is very important for individuals. In the collective, we shared all knowledge instantly. But as individuals, we must learn things for ourselves. We are discovering that learning as an individual is much more satisfying than simply receiving information from the group mind." Through the station's speakers came an announcement. "Attention all species. The Galactic Council of Individuals will now hold its first official meeting. Representatives from 47 different species will discuss the formation of a new alliance based on mutual respect and individual freedom." Jake felt a surge of pride. The Galactic Council had been humanity's idea, but it had been embraced by species throughout the galaxy. Instead of the old system where stronger civilizations conquered weaker ones, the new alliance was based on cooperation between equal partners. Admiral Lisa Carter's voice came through Jake's personal communicator. "Morrison, we just received word from the Andromeda Galaxy. They've heard about what happened here, and they're requesting assistance. Apparently, they have their own collective empire that's been oppressing individual species for thousands of years." Jake looked out at the peaceful gathering of ships around Freedom Station. Former enemies were now friends, working together to build a better galaxy. But there were still countless beings in other galaxies who lived under collective oppression. "Tell Bem we'll send a team," Jake replied, "but not with weapons. We'll send teachers, people who can show them how to embrace individual freedom." Thax-9 overheard and stepped forward. "My people would like to volunteer for that mission. We understand what it's like to break free from collective control. We can help others make the same journey." Kate Rogers smiled. "I think Dr. Brooks would approve. Spreading freedom through knowledge rather than force." As the day continued, more ships arrived at Freedom Station. Each one brought stories of transformation and hope. Former slave species were building their own governments. Art and music were flourishing as individuals discovered their personal creativity. Children born after the liberation were growing up with the knowledge that their thoughts belonged to them alone. Danny Walsh pointed to his sensor readings. "Captain, I'm detecting something interesting. The former Zephyrian homeworld is broadcasting a signal across all frequencies." "What kind of signal?" Jake asked. Danny listened to his instruments. "It's music. Individual Zetherians are composing and performing their own songs. They're sharing them with the galaxy, not as a collective voice, but as personal expressions." Jake closed his eyes and listened as the station's computers translated the alien music into sounds humans could appreciate. It was beautiful and chaotic, filled with the joy and confusion of beings discovering their own souls for the first time. "She did it," Jake whispered. "Amanda really did it. She didn't just save humanity. She saved the concept of individuality itself." Thax-9 placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "In our old language, we had no word for individual. Now it is the most important word in our vocabulary. Dr. Brooks taught us that being different from each other is not a weakness to be corrected, but a strength to be celebrated." As the sun set on Earth, visible through the station's windows, Jake thought about the future. There would be challenges ahead as trillions of beings learned to live as individuals. There would be conflicts and misunderstandings as different species figured out how to cooperate without losing their unique perspectives. But for the first time in galactic history, Those conflicts would be between free beings choosing their own paths, not between oppressive collectives seeking to absorb everything in their path. The age of conquest was truly over. The age of individual choice, creativity, and freedom had begun. And it had all started with one human woman who believed that the chaos of individual thought was worth dying for. Dr. Amanda Brooks had given the universe its soul back, one mind at a time. The consciousness amplifier sent a wave of pure human thought across the galaxy. Dr. Brooks screamed as her mind was torn apart and scattered through space. But her sacrifice carried with it something the Zetherians had never experienced before. The raw chaos of individual human consciousness. Laid Overseer Thax 9 was the first to feel it. One moment he was calmly overseeing the absorption of another primitive species. The next moment, something impossible crashed into his mind like a meteor made of pure thought. Suddenly, Thax 9 was thinking thoughts that were his alone. For 300 years, he had shared every idea with the collective consciousness. Every decision had been made by billions of minds working together. But now, for the first time since his absorption, he was having private thoughts that belonged only to him. The feeling was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. Thax 9 found himself remembering his home planet Zerion, remembering what it felt like to be an individual creature with his own dreams and fears. He remembered the day the Zetherians came, and for the first time in centuries, he felt anger about it. What is happening to me? Thax 9 said out loud, his voice shaking. Around him, other Zetherian officers were clutching their heads and making similar sounds of confusion. The effect spread through the collective network like a virus of individuality. Every Zetherian drone suddenly found themselves thinking independent thoughts. Ship captains who had followed orders without question for thousands of years suddenly started wondering why they were following those orders. Engineers who had worked in perfect coordination began arguing about the best way to fix problems. Aboard the Defiance, Jake Morrison watched in amazement as the alien ship around them began to malfunction. The biomechanical walls that had been pulsing in perfect rhythm started beating at different rates. Some sections glowed brighter while others dimmed. The low humming sound became a chaotic mixture of different tones. What's happening? Danny Walsh asked, staring at his instruments. Their ship's systems are going crazy. Through the viewport, Jake could see the Zetherian fleet in the distance. Ships that had maintained perfect formation were now drifting apart. Some vessels were flying in circles, while others had stopped moving completely. A few ships were actually firing on each other. In the science lab, Dr. Brooks was dying. The consciousness amplifier had burned through her neural pathways, but she could still feel what was happening through the device. Her individual human consciousness was spreading through the Zetherian network like wildfire, infecting every mind it touched with the concept of personal freedom. It's working, she gasped, blood running from her nose. They can't handle being individuals. They don't know how to think for themselves. Paul Stevens left his engineering station and ran to the science lab. He found Dr. Brooks collapsed on the floor, her body shaking as the amplifier continued to drain her life force. The machine itself was glowing so brightly it hurt to look at. Amanda, you need to shut it down, Paul said, kneeling beside her. Dr. Brooks shook her head weakly. Not yet. The effect needs time to spread through their entire network. If I stop, now they might recover. Throughout the Zetherian fleet, chaos was spreading. Captain Vex 7 of the cruiser Domination found himself questioning why he had spent the last 2,000 years conquering peaceful species. The collective had always told him it was for the greater good, but now he was having his own thoughts about what was good and what was evil. Orders from the flagship, his communications officer reported. We are to maintain attack formation and prepare for planetary bombardment. For the first time in his existence, Captain Vex 7 disagreed with an order. "No," he said, surprising himself with the word. "I don't want to destroy any more planets. I want to go home." His communications officer stared at him in shock. "Sir, you cannot refuse orders from the collective." "Watch me," Vex 7 replied, and turned his ship away from Earth. Other ships in his squadron followed his example, their own captains suddenly discovering the power of individual choice. The Zetherian command ship shuddered as internal conflicts tore through its systems. Different sections of the vessel started operating independently. The navigation system wanted to go to one star system, while the weapon system preferred a different target. The life support systems couldn't agree on the proper temperature and kept changing it every few seconds. Fax 9 stumbled through the corridors of his ship, no longer able to hear the comforting voice of the collective in his mind. For the first time in centuries, his thoughts were completely his own. It was frightening, but it was also liberating. He passed other Zetherian officers who were having similar experiences. Some were sitting on the floor, overwhelmed by the sudden flood of individual thoughts. Others were walking around in confusion, no longer sure what their purpose was. A few had started removing the biomechanical implants that connected them to the collective network. "Report," Fax 9 demanded when he reached the bridge. But his crew couldn't give him a coherent report because they were all thinking different thoughts at the same time. "The humans did something to us," one officer managed to say. "They made us into individuals." Fax 9 felt another wave of alien emotion, curiosity. What had it been like for the humans, living their entire lives as separate beings? How did they make decisions without the guidance of the collective? How did they deal with the loneliness of having thoughts that no one else shared? The consciousness amplifier finally burned out completely, its crystal core cracking from the enormous energy discharge. Dr. Brooks took her last breath, a smile on her face as she felt the chaos spreading through 17 galaxies. Her individual human consciousness had infected the entire Zetherian network with the beautiful virus of free, while Jake Morrison knelt beside her body, tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered Dot around them. The alien ship was falling apart. Not from weapons or explosions, but from the simple fact that its crew could no longer work together. Each Zetherian was trying to operate the ship according to their own newly formed opinions, and none of them could agree on anything. Kate Rogers watched her sensor readings in disbelief. "Captain, the entire enemy fleet is breaking apart. Ships are leaving formation. Some are attacking each other, and a few are just sitting dead in space." Danny Walsh looked up from his navigation controls. "Sir, several Zetherian ships are sending us messages. They're asking for help." "Help?" Jake asked, confused. "They want to know how we deal with having individual thoughts," Danny explained. "They're scared and confused. They don't know how to be individuals." Through the main viewport, Jake could see Zetherian ships drifting helplessly through space. Some were spinning out of control as their crews argued about which direction to fly. Others had shut down completely as their operators became paralyzed by the overwhelming responsibility of making their own decisions. Paul Stevens returned from the science lab, his face grim. "Dr. Brooks is gone, but her readings show the effect is still spreading. Every Zetherian in the galaxy is experiencing individual consciousness for the first time." Jake stood up slowly, looking out at the chaos in the enemy fleet. 3,000 years of galactic conquest had been ended not by superior weapons or tactics, but by one human woman who had shared the gift of individual thought with beings who had never experienced it before. The age of the collective was over. The age of individual choice had begun. And across 17 galaxies, trillions of newly freed minds were taking their first tentative steps toward freedom, guided by the chaotic, beautiful example of human consciousness that Dr. Amanda Brooks had given them with her life. The Zetherian fleet came out of hyperspace like a swarm of metal demons. Their ships blocked out the stars, each one bigger than anything humans had ever built. The largest ship in the center looked like a moving city made of dark metal and glowing. Vane's lead overseer Thax 9 stood in the command center of the flagship. Once, long ago, Thax 9 had been a living creature from a planet called Zerion. But that was before the Zetherians absorbed his species 300 years ago. Now he was part of the collective consciousness, his individual thoughts merged with trillions of others across the galaxy. Through the ship's sensors, Thax 9 observed the small human vessel approaching. It looked like a tiny insect flying toward a giant spider web. The human ship was well built for their primitive technology, but it was nothing compared to Zetherian engineering. Analysis complete. The collective voice spoke through Thax 9's mind. Single human warship. Crew of approximately 100 beings. Weapons systems. Primitive kinetic and energy weapons. Threat level. Minimal. Thax 9 felt something that might have been amusement if he still had individual emotions. Another desperate last stand. They always send their best ship to die gloriously, while their homeworld prepares for absorption. The collective had seen this pattern thousands of times before. When a species realized they could not win, they would send their finest warriors on a suicide mission. It was always pointless, but the collective found these final gestures useful for studying each species' psychological patterns. Aboard the UN's Defiance, Captain Jake Morrison watched the alien fleet through the main screen. Each Zetherian ship was covered in strange growths that moved like living tissue. Weapons that looked like giant thorns sprouted from their hulls. Energy fields crackled between the ships like purple lightning. "My God," Danny Walsh whispered from his navigation station. "There are so many of them." Jake counted at least 50 of the massive dreadnoughts, plus hundreds of smaller ships that were still larger than anything in the human fleet. Each ship pulsed with biomechanical life, their hulls shifting and changing as they prepared for battle. "All hands, this is the captain," Jake announced over the ship's communication system. "In a few minutes, we're going to fly into the middle of the largest enemy fleet in galactic history. We're going to face weapons that have destroyed 1,000 civilizations. But remember this, we carry something they've never encountered before. We carry the hope of every free-thinking being in the universe." In the science lab, Dr. Brooks made final adjustments to the consciousness amplifier. The device hummed with barely contained energy. She had connected monitoring wires to her temples and arms. When the time came, she would link her mind directly to the machine. "Final systems check," she said into her communicator. Paul Stevens' voice came back from the engine room. "All power systems ready. I've rerouted everything non-essential to your machine. When you activate it, you'll have the full power of our reactor core." "Weapons ready," Kate Rogers reported. "Though I don't know how much good they'll do against those things." "Navigation systems optimal," Danny added. "I've plotted a course straight through their formation to the command ship." Jake took a deep breath. "Dr. Brooks, how much time do you need once we're captured?" 30 seconds from the moment they start trying to absorb us," she replied. "Maybe less if I can synchronize with their absorption frequency." The Zetherian fleet began moving toward them. The larger ships stayed back, while smaller vessels moved forward in a complex pattern. Jake had studied their tactics from previous battles. They would surround his ship, disable it, and then drag it into the command vessel for processing. "Here they come," Danny said, watching his sensors. 12 ships moving to intercept. The first Zetherian vessels were beautiful and terrible at the same time. Their hulls seemed to flow like liquid metal, constantly reshaping themselves. Strange. Lights pulsed beneath their surfaces like alien heartbeats. As they got closer, Jake could see mechanical tentacles extending from their sides. "They're not shooting at us," Kate observed. "They want us alive." "Of course they do," Jake said grimly. "Dead humans can't be absorbed into their collective." The Zetherian ships surrounded the Defiance in a perfect sphere formation. Beams of pale blue energy reached out from their hulls and wrapped around the human ship like glowing ropes. Jake felt the Defiance shudder as the alien tractor beams took hold. "They've got us," Danny reported. "I'm reading massive energy discharges. From their ships, they're scanning us." On the Zetherian flagship, Fax 9 studied the readings from the human vessel. The scans revealed exactly what he expected. A crew of individual minds, each thinking separate thoughts. It would be a simple matter to connect them to the collective consciousness and absorb their knowledge and memories. "Begin absorption preparation," Fax 9 commanded. "Route all human neural patterns through the primary processing matrix." The Defiance was pulled slowly toward the massive command ship. Jake watched as a huge opening appeared in the alien vessel's hull, big enough to swallow his entire ship. The walls of the opening were covered in writhing biomechanical structures that looked like giant neurons. "That's their absorption chamber," Jake said quietly. "Once we're inside, they'll start trying to connect to our minds." Dr. Brooks' voice came through the intercom. "Remember, everyone, when they start the absorption process, think about what makes you human. Think about freedom, about making your own choices, about being different from everyone else." The ship passed through the opening and into the Zetherian vessel. The walls around them pulsed with alien life. Strange lights danced across surfaces that seemed to be part machine and part living tissue. Jake could hear a low humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "We're inside," Danny reported, "reading massive bioelectrical activity all around us." Mechanical arms reached out from the walls and clamped onto the Defiance's hull. Jake felt the ship shake as the Zetherians began connecting their systems to his ship's computers. Warning lights flashed across all the control panels. "They're hacking our systems," Paul called from engineering. "I'm trying to maintain firewalls, but their technology is too advanced." On his command screen, Jake watched as alien programs invaded his ship's computer networks. The Zetherians were incredibly efficient. Within minutes, they had accessed the ship's personnel files, scanning the crew's mental patterns through their personal devices. Fax 9 observed the absorption process with satisfaction. The humans were reacting exactly as expected. Their individual minds showed the typical pattern of fear and confusion that preceded absorption. Soon they would be part of the collective, their primitive but interesting perspectives added to the vast Zetherian consciousness. Neural connection established with 97% of the crew, his subordinates reported. Beginning consciousness transfer in 30 seconds. In the science lab, Dr. Brooks watched her instruments as alien energy began probing her mind. She could feel the Zetherian consciousness trying to connect to her thoughts, trying to pull her into their collective network. This was the moment she had been waiting for. "Jake," she said into her communicator, "they're starting the absorption process. I can feel them in my head." "Do it," Jake replied. "Save humanity." Dr. Brooks placed her hand on the activation control. The consciousness amplifier began to glow brighter, drawing power from the ship's reactor. She could feel her own mind being mapped by the machine, every thought and memory being prepared for transmission. "For every human who ever dreamed of being free," she whispered, and activated the device. The consciousness amplifier exploded with energy that went far beyond the physical realm. Dr. Brooks' individual human consciousness was suddenly magnified, 1,000,000 times in broadcast, directly into the Zetherian collective network. For the first time in their 3,000-year history, the Zetherians were about to experience what it meant to be truly, chaotically, beautifully human. Dr. Amanda Brooks stood beside her strange machine, watching the lights blink across its surface. She had been working on this device for 6 months without sleep, barely eating, pushing herself to solve the impossible puzzle. Her hands shook slightly as she touched the crystal at the center of the machine. Jake and his crew gathered around the lab table. The device hummed softly, making a sound like distant music. Wires connected the crystal to the ship's main computer systems. Small lights danced inside the crystal like trapped stars. "I call it the consciousness amplifier," Dr. Brooks said. Her voice was quiet but excited. "It took me months to understand why the Cytherians are so good at absorbing other species." Kate Rogers looked confused. "What do you mean?" Dr. Brooks pulled up a holographic display showing different alien species. Every civilization the Cytherians have conquered shared one thing. They all had some kind of group mind or hive connection. The Altarians shared thoughts through telepathy. The Centauri used quantum brain linking. The vegan colonies had collective decision-making built into their DNA. Danny Walsh studied the display, so the Cytherians found it easy to plug into. "Their minds?" "Exactly," Dr. Brooks said. "When you already think as a group, it's not hard for someone else to take control of that group. The Cytherians just replaced the original group mind with their own collective consciousness." Paul Stevens frowned. "But humans don't have group minds. We're all individuals." Dr. Brooks smiled for the first time in months. "That's exactly right. And that's been driving me crazy, trying to figure out how to use it as a weapon." Jake looked at the machine again. "How does this thing work?" Dr. Brooks touched a control panel, and the crystal grew brighter. "The Cytherians absorb other species by connecting to their group consciousness. But what happens if they try to absorb a species that has no group consciousness? What happens if they try to absorb pure individuality?" The room was quiet except for the humming of the machine. Jake could see his crew thinking about what Dr. Brooks had said. It sounded impossible, but then again, they were fighting an impossible enemy. "You're saying this machine can project human thoughts?" Kate asked. "Not just thoughts," Dr. Brooks said. "Human consciousness itself. The raw, unfiltered experience of being an individual human being. All the chaos and creativity and stubbornness that makes us who we are." She walked to another control panel and brought up a new display. This one showed brain wave patterns. Some looked smooth and regular, like waves on a calm ocean. Others looked like jagged mountains and deep valleys. "These smooth patterns are from species with group minds," Dr. Brooks explained. "See how regular they are? How predictable? The Cytherians can easily match these patterns and take control." She pointed to the jagged patterns. "These are human brain waves. Look at how chaotic they are. Every human thinks differently. We all have different dreams, different fears, different ways of solving problems. We argue with each other constantly. We can't even agree on what color the sky is sometimes." Danny laughed despite the serious situation. "That's true. Humans are pretty argumentative. The Cytherians have never encountered anything like us," Dr. Brooks continued. "Their entire system is based on order and unity. When they try to absorb human consciousness, instead of adding us to their collective, they'll be exposed to something their minds were never designed to handle." Jake was beginning to understand. "You're going to give them a dose of human individuality." "More than a dose," Dr. Brooks said. "I'm going to flood their entire network with it. Every Cytherian in their fleet will suddenly experience what it's like to be human. They'll start having individual thoughts for the first time in their lives." Paul Stevens looked worried. "What will that do to them?" Dr. Brooks pulled up another display showing computer simulations. "Based on my calculations, the psychological shock should disrupt their entire collective consciousness. Imagine if you had spent your whole life thinking as part of a group, and then suddenly you are forced to think only for yourself. It would be like suddenly losing most of your mind. The crew was quiet as they thought about this. It sounded like it might work, but it also sounded incredibly dangerous. "There's a problem, though," Dr. Brooks said, and her excited expression became sad. "The machine needs a human consciousness to focus through. Someone has to connect directly to the device and let it use their mind as a transmitter." "That doesn't sound so bad," Danny said. Dr. Brooks shook her head. "The process will burn out the operator's brain completely. Whoever uses this machine will die." The lab became very quiet. The only sound was the humming of the consciousness amplifier and the distant rumble of the ship's engines. Jake looked around at his crew. These people had followed him across the galaxy. They trusted him to find a way to save humanity. Now he was asking one of them to die for it. "How close do we need to be?" Jake asked finally. "Very close," Dr. Brooks said. "The Zetherians need to be trying to absorb us when I activate the device. They need to have their consciousness connection open." Kate Rogers understood immediately. "We have to let them capture us." "It's the only way," Dr. Brooks confirmed. "They have to think they're winning. They have to start the absorption process before I can hit them with human individuality." Jake stared at the machine. Such a small device to carry the weight of humanity's survival. He thought about Earth, about the 12 billion people who were counting on them. He thought about all the human colonies that had already fallen. He thought about what would happen to human art and music and literature if the Zetherians won. "How long before they reach Earth?" Jake asked. Paul Stevens checked his instruments. 68 hours now, sir." Dr. Brooks nodded. "I need at least 12 hours to finish calibrating the device. We'll have to intercept their fleet before they reach the inner system." Jake looked at each member of his crew. Danny Walsh, barely 25 years old, who could pilot a ship through an asteroid field blindfolded. Kate Rogers, who could hit a target the size of a coin from 1,000 kilometers away. Paul Stevens, who could keep engines running with spare parts and determination. Dr. Amanda Brooks, who had spent 6 months finding a way to weaponize the human soul. "I won't order anyone to operate that machine," Jake said. "It has to be a volunteer." Dr. Brooks was already connecting herself to the device's monitoring systems. "I built it," she said simply. "I understand it better than anyone else. And besides, I've always wondered what makes humans so beautifully stubborn. Maybe it's time the universe found out." Jake wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. Dr. Brooks was the only one who fully understood the machine. If anyone could make it work, it would be her. "We'll need to get close to their command ship," Jake said. "Close enough for them to start absorbing us." Kate Rogers checked her weapon systems one more time. "Our guns won't do much good against their fleet." "We're not depending on guns this time," Jake said. He looked at the consciousness amplifier again. Such a small thing to hold so much hope. "We're depending on what makes us human." Outside the ship, space was dark and cold and empty. But somewhere in that darkness, 47 Zetherian dreadnoughts were heading toward Earth, confident in their ability to absorb one more species into their collective consciousness. They had no idea. They were about to meet something they had never encountered before: the beautiful, terrible, chaotic power of human individuality. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the large window of his ship's control room. He watched the red light coming from a dying star system far away. The light looked angry and sad at the same time. Behind that red glow, an entire galaxy was being destroyed by creatures that humans called the Zetherians. Jake had been fighting these aliens for 5 years now. He had seen them destroy dozens of human colonies. Each time was the same. The Zetherians would arrive in massive ships that looked like giant metal insects. They would surround a planet and then do something worse and just killing everyone. They would absorb the people into their own minds, The humans would stop being human. They would become part of the alien collective, losing everything that made them who they were. The bridge around Jake was quiet, except for the soft humming of computers. His crew knew what they were looking at. Danny Walsh sat at the navigation controls, his young face tight with worry. Kate Rogers checked her weapons systems for the 100th time that day. Paul Stevens worked on the engine controls, making sure everything was running perfectly. These people had followed Jake across the galaxy. They trusted him to keep them alive. A voice came through the ship's communication system. It was Admiral Lisa Carter from Earth Command. Her voice sounded tired and old, even though Jake knew she was only 45 years old. The war had aged everyone quickly. "Morrison, are you seeing this?" the Admiral asked. "Yes, ma'am," Jake replied. "The Kepler system is gone." "That was the last free human colony in the Outer Rim," Carter said. "We've lost everything out there. The Cytherians are moving toward the core systems now. Our scouts report their main fleet is heading straight for Earth." Jake felt his stomach drop. Earth, the home of humanity. The planet where 12 billion people lived and worked and loved and dreamed. If the Cytherians reached Earth, it would be over. Not just the death of humanity, but the end of human thoughts and feelings and creativity. Everything that made humans special would be absorbed into the alien collective mind. "How long do we have?" Jake asked. 72 hours, maybe less," Carter replied. "Their fastest ships are already past the Mars defense grid." Danny Walsh looked up from his controls. "Captain, I'm picking up movement on long-range sensors." "Big movement." Jake walked over to look at Danny's screen. What he saw there made his blood run cold. Dozens of red dots were moving across the star map. Each dot represented a Cytherian warship. Each ship was the size of a small moon. "How many?" Jake asked quietly. "I count 47 dreadnoughts," Danny said. "And that's just the main battle group. There are smaller ships too, hundreds of them." "Kate." Rogers whistled softly. "Our entire fleet has maybe 20 ships that could fight one of their dreadnoughts. And we'd probably lose." Jake knew she was right. The Cytherians had been conquering galaxies for 3,000 years. Every time they defeated a new species, they took that species' technology and made it better. They had weapons that could crack planets in half. They had shields that could stop anything humans could throw at them. They had taken the best ideas from 1,000 different civilizations and combined them into the perfect war machine. "Sir," Paul Stevens called from the engine station, "we're getting a priority message from Dr. Amanda Brooks in the science lab. She says it's urgent." Jake had almost forgotten about Dr. Brooks. She had been working on some kind of secret project for the past 6 months, something that Earth Command had ordered her to develop. Jake had never been told what it was, only that it was humanity's last hope. "Put her through," Jake said. Dr. Brooks' voice came through the speakers. She sounded excited and scared at the same time. "Captain, I need you to come to the lab right now. All of you. I think I've found something. A way to fight them." Jake looked around at his crew. They all had the same expression on their faces. Hope mixed with disbelief. How could one human scientist find a way to fight an enemy that had conquered countless galaxies? "We'll be right." "There," Jake said Dot as they walked through the corridors of the ship. Jake thought about the war. He remembered the first time he had seen a Cytherian ship. It had been beautiful and terrible at the same time. The hull was covered in what looked like living metal that moved and shifted like skin. The weapons were grown rather than built, like deadly flowers blooming from the ship's surface. But the worst part wasn't the ships. It was what happened to the people the Cytherians captured. Jake had seen video recordings from the first colonies that fell. The humans didn't die. Instead, they stood up and started talking in perfect unison. Their eyes became blank and empty. They were still alive, but they weren't human anymore. They were just parts of the alien collective mind. The Cytherians called it perfect unity. They believed that individual thoughts were a disease. They thought that separate minds caused conflict and suffering. Their solution was to make everyone think the same thoughts, to make everyone want the same things, to turn the entire universe into one giant mind with trillions of bodies. Jake and his crew reached the science lab Dr. Brooks was waiting for them, standing next to a strange device that hummed with energy. It looked like a crystal surrounded by metal rings and covered in wires. "This is it," Dr. Brooks said. "This is how we fight them." Jake stared at the device. It didn't look like a weapon. It didn't look like anything special at all. Just a scientist's experiment sitting on a lab table. "What does it do?" Jake asked. Dr. Brooks smiled, but her smile was sad. "It does something the Cytherians never expected," she said. "It makes us more human than ever before." Outside the ship, the red light from the dying star system grew brighter. Somewhere in that light, the Cytherian fleet was preparing for their final assault on humanity. They had conquered thousands of species before. They had absorbed entire galaxies into their collective mind. They had never failed, but they had never fought humans before. And humans, Jake was beginning to realize, might be different from every other species in the universe. Different in a way that could either save them or destroy them completely.